this really is sort of a phase ahead of the US, who are just now beginning to realize there may be the need to sort of restrain some of the sort of more monopolistic behaviors of the big tech companies, which are really becoming very stark and apparent as we see, certainly in recent months, the, sort of trying to conspire to say stop people advertising across, Google and Facebook, and, the EU's basically been trying to change behavioural, sort of introducing behavioural legislation and changes for some time now, and we're now really moving, or the EU's now really moving to the next phase, with sort of much tighter legislation and really, really pushing home those antitrust laws. So I think it's not really different approaches; it's just different phases of the same approach.
And Stephen, would you agree with that? Different phases of the same approach?
I certainly agree that the EU is ahead of the US in terms of regulation. They did the extensive privacy regulation, and their concerns are the same. But I think one difference is the US naturally has a backstop in that they don't want to harm necessarily American companies, and the EU is a little miffed that they have no big tech companies like Facebook or Google, and wouldn't be too upset if they just collected a lot of money from fines.
Yeah, taxes is a big issue. I'll come to that. But the other big one, Stephen, is data. Can we trust Silicon Valley with so much data?
I don't think we can trust anyone with a huge amount of personal data about ourselves. I think that people are awakening to the fact that there is too much personal data collected about them and they don't have control over it. And while the EU made some advances in privacy, what a lot of people see is just some little dialogue box comes up saying, are you okay with this? And they don't know what they're being okay with, and they're clicking it. I think we need something more extensive on both sides of the Atlantic, where people would actually get a choice as to what data is collected about them. And it wouldn't be collected unless they gave permission. And it would be up to the companies to make the case that if you share this data with us, we'll improve your experience.
And Kate, people on both sides of the Atlantic are asking, should any company be as powerful as the big names in Silicon Valley?
Well, exactly. I mean, unfortunately, I think the sort of the rabbit is rather out of the hole in this respect. They have become so big and so powerful, and they are literally swallowing up other entities that even have a chance of coming into competition with them. So you need to start breaking down right to the bare roots of the structure of these companies and start putting some fairly firm legislation in place to stop them from doing this sort of like sucking everything into the black hole of one company. But I do a lot of education and outreach, and I teach the kids from primary age, don't trust anybody with your data online. We have to start taking personal responsibility for protecting data before we give it to the tech companies.
And that, Stephen, is what I told my kids about Facebook. It's going to be there forever if you reveal lots of information.
Well, first of all, in terms of the information collected, it's not so much even what you choose to share. It's information they pick up about you as you go on Facebook and even go on the web. So there's that problem, and and the information that's collected becomes powerful in elections because places can target you by that data, and they know your vulnerabilities. The argument that Facebook and the others give is that by having this information, we're sending you more relevant ads that are useful to you, but you're also vulnerable to places placing ads because they know they can manipulate you in a certain way. And that's not good for anyone except maybe the company that's collecting from the ads and the place that's manipulating you.
These behemoths of Silicon Valley, they have a stranglehold, Stephen, on the market. Does that mean there's no chance of anybody coming in to challenge them?
Well, not in the short term. Typically what happens is in technology is that when a new kind of technology comes in, there's an opportunity for a reset. So if you look back in the past when the user interface, the graphical user interface came, that upset the previous leader. When the mobile phone came, that was a disruption period. And people are looking ahead of what's the next one. And that's why it's a little concerning that these companies have so much power. They're now trying to get ahead of the next wave, as when Facebook spent a lot of money to buy a virtual reality company, when Mark Zuckerberg became convinced that in 10 years, we would all be operating in some other reality, and that would be the next great operating system of the future.
But the EU, we mentioned it earlier, has a bee in its bonnet about taxes from all of Silicon Valley. Does that show an animosity, or is it purely about money?
Well, I don't know. The problem with, free market enterprise is it does allow for different countries to operate different taxation laws in order to attract the big, businesses to them. And this is something that we maybe need to come to a global understanding of, because the problem with a tech company is it operates without borders. So they can up sticks and move anytime that they want. So you've got to strike a careful balance between not stifling innovation, but also not sort of, blowing up the deficit and having, the biggest most profitable companies through a pandemic being the only ones who are earning any money and paying virtually no taxes. That's obviously not a sustainable economic model for any country. But until we come together and agree on a standard, there's always going to be the ability for companies to play countries off against each other. So I honestly don't know what the answer is.
Thinking of big brother, big data, privacy, that's a very big issue. Could that issue be the downfall, or will they have to try and become less anonymous for people who are clicking on their sites?
We need to understand as consumers that if we're not paying for something, then we're not a customer, we're a product. And if you don't like that, if you don't like being treated like a product and your data as a commodity that is the company's business to do with what they will, then you need to start being prepared to pay for the services that you currently get free. So I think we're going to start to see, especially as younger people become sort of the consumers of the future, because certainly in the education outreach that I do, the young people are much more aware and connected with empathically with the impact of cybercrime and misinformation, disinformation, bad politics. They're really on it, and they want stuff that is private. And I think you're going to find that in future they'll be happy to pay for it. And then we'll start to see the landscape shift a bit away from this sort of the free providers having all the power, actually to us realizing that we have the power. But we also need to understand that we've got to pay for stuff if we want to use it.
So, Stephen, in that shifting landscape that Kate foresees, will privacy be the big issue? And if the big tech companies don't adopt a policy of care, then they're going to face greater regulation.
Well, I think they're facing greater regulation now, and well, they should. I think that it's incumbent upon the regulatory bodies, globally, to roll back some of the compromises of our privacy that these companies have taken advantage of. I talked to the people who founded Google, the people, Mark Zuckerberg, who founded Facebook. And when they began their products, they had no firm plan on how to monetize them. And they lit on advertising because that's where the opportunity was. And they used personal information for the advertising because it was legal. They could do that. If we have a tougher regulatory infrastructure that doesn't allow them to use that data, they're going to find other ways that might be better for everyone to monetize their products. And I think the solution that I'm hoping for is that we're going to get tougher regulation to make those companies change their models and find ways to get rich, maybe not quite as rich, without using our information without our permission.
Richer, probably. Stephen Levy and Kate Russell, many thanks to you both for joining us on The Agenda.
Thank you.
Thanks.